This is round 3, I believe, that we're going into here, Stephen, and the focus is going to be around the module of distress tolerance. Am I leading into this? Okay, so let's begin. What is distress tolerance?
Massive question. Basically what we're trying to understand, so from a DBT perspective, there are all these different modules. And when we look at it from DBT skills training, the second module, I mean, there is no specific order that you're supposed to do the modules in, but if you were going to do them in an order that makes sense, you would start with just the basic understanding of self-analysis. Then you would take a look at what it means to build the mindfulness program that we're looking to build. Then you would step into what's called distress tolerance. So any of the behaviors that kick in for us, that when we're integrating schema therapy to dialectical behavior therapy, we label these behaviors as not being bad or wrong. We label them as maladaptive and ineffective for us to live the life we want to live and be the person that we want to be. Those behaviors are in response to our personality system being in what we call distress. So it is incredibly important for us to develop the ability to, first of all, learn how to identify what this distress is. What does it look like? What does it feel like? What does it sound like inside of our personality system, so that we can start to activate the skills of distress tolerance, first of all, to be able to tolerate the emotional experience that we have and deal with these emotions in a more adaptive and effective way, compared to the way that we were dealing with them, that we were labeling before as maladaptive and ineffective. And the key to this, to the distress tolerance skills, is being able to, first of all, identify that the distress is coming into your system, and then implement these skills. So first things first, what do we mean by distress? The distress that's coming into our system is basically when we step outside of a specific window of tolerance that we have, with a lower level and an upper level to this window of tolerance. And for most people, this window of tolerance is, I don't know, let's say, for example, if you grew up in an environment where all of your childhood needs were met and you're fairly kind of middle of the road when it comes to your emotional sensitivity, you were validated as a child and you developed a pretty healthy sense of self, then your window of tolerance is, kind of this big. And there is no actual number for it, but let's just pretend it's like this, right? If you're somebody who is emotionally sensitive and you grew up in an environment that was invalidating for your emotional experiences, then that window of tolerance shrinks like a little bit. If you experience childhood trauma, then that window of tolerance shrinks a little bit more. So there's a lot of different factors that play into this window of tolerance. And when you go outside of this window of tolerance, you're in what we call a fear-based state, which is what we mean by being in distress. So when we go into a fear-based state, we go into a number of different automatic responses. And it's important to identify these responses as being a representation of our system being in distress. So a lot of people know this as the fight or flight response. It's a little bit of a generic term, but basically when we're in distress, we go into 5, from the perspective of the work that we do, we go into 5 automatic responses, and you can flip through all of them. You can be in one, you can be in, a specific one for a period of time, or you can slowly rotate through some of them depending on what's working. But basically we go into fight or overcompensation, flight or physically remove yourself, distract, which is, like, ooh, shiny thing, like trying to stay away, freeze, not doing anything, or submit. Okay, so this is what we mean by going into a state of distress. And when we're able to identify these different behavioral patterns that are coming out in us, we can activate some of the skills of distress tolerance to be able to cope with the distress that's coming into our system. So the most important thing, and this is why mindfulness is incredibly important when we start talking about the DBT skills, which is the conversation we had in the last episode. The big thing that we're trying to do is develop the awareness for this distress that's coming into our system. So what does it look like in our behaviors? What does it feel like in our emotions and our feelings? What does it sound like in our thoughts? So that we can start to activate the skills of distress tolerance. Does that make sense?
It does. If I could just go back to something you said, because I want to be clear on the conditioning aspect, when we're talking about that window of opportunity and the lack of emotional validation, let's say, is there also maybe a biological aspect in who may be more sensitive to this type of stuff versus who may not be?
Yeah, absolutely. So when you look at the DBT in its pure form, the general demographic population, if you like, that we're trying to that it was originally catered towards, and I think it's still most effective when it's working with this particular population, is people that are, when we look at our the nature that we were born with, the temperament that we were born with. So from a schema therapy perspective, the only thing that we're born with when it comes to personality is our temperament. Okay, so are you somebody that's passive versus aggressive? Are you introverted versus extroverted? Are you irritable versus cheerful? And the big one that we look at when we come to DBT, are you emotionally sensitive versus non-reactive? Now, this temperament, this nature that we're born with, is on a continuum. It's not black and white, it's not on or off. So, dialectically speaking, at one side of the continuum, you've got people that are really emotionally sensitive. Every little experience that we're having creates a big emotional experience. And on the other side of the continuum, we've got people that are non-reactive, so completely out of touch with their emotional experiences. We fall, depending on the situation that we're in, somewhere on this continuum. And where we spend a lot of time, the people who are the skills of DBT integrated with schema therapy are most effective with people who spend more time on this side of the continuum towards the emotional sensitivity aspect of things. And this is a biological factor. I am born with a temperament that is emotionally sensitive. So therefore, that window of opportunity that we speak about is a little bit smaller than somebody who is born on this side of the continuum, where they're a lot more non-reactive. So it's easier for us on this side of the continuum to go into a state of flight than it is for somebody on this side of the continuum. Do you understand what I mean?
I do. And I also understand, if I'm understanding you correctly, that it's not black and white, and that
Yeah.
you are this. It's depending on the circumstance, the
Yes.
situation.
Yeah.
And this might also lend to the fact that if I am, and I do identify as a highly sensitive person, and I grew up in an environment in which I wasn't emotionally validated, it's a perfect storm for ineffective maladaptive behaviors.
Absolutely.
So, okay, so let me ask you this then, Stephen. If I'm a person who's found myself distracting a lot, okay, and it's been effective to keep me safe, but it's not effective for living the life I want to live because I'm experiencing inability to focus at times.
Yeah.
Okay, so I'm able to manage it in a sense, right? That's what we're trying to do here is manage the behavior.
Yes.
Okay. What would you say is the first step I want to take if I've recognized this is something I'm doing and a part of me doesn't want to do it anymore? What do I do right now?
Yeah, so the key component that you've got there, where everything starts, is being able to recognize it and understand that this is a coping mechanism for being in a fear-based state, that distract, I can't focus. And it's first of all recognizing that behavior pattern is not bad or wrong. We're not trying to label it as something that is, you have to stop doing, like this kind of very shame-inducing narrative that can come into our system. What you're recognizing in the language that you're using is, yes, it's effective because every behavior that we have, when it was created, so most of these behaviors are created when we're children. If I grew up, like you said, in an environment where my emotions weren't validated, where I'm a highly sensitive person, maybe there's a situation where both parents are out of the house all the time, so I'm not secure in what's happening for me. I don't feel safe, so there's fear in my system. As a child in that kind of an environment, I learned to just distract away from the lack of support in the environment by, constantly flipping into different things, TV, video games, just kind of escaping from the moment by using fantasy and things like that to get out of the fear that's in my system. So as a result of that, that's an incredibly effective coping mechanism in the moment as a child for the fear that's in my system. When we grow up as an adult, though, and we're starting to get into school and university and work situations and trying to be in the moment so that we can be productive and effective in the life we want to live, it's not effective for me to be constantly distracted. I can't focus my mind. So the behavior isn't bad or wrong. At the time of its creation, it was incredibly effective for us to do that, to get through the situations that we were experiencing. Now it's not effective. So it's not that the behavior is bad or wrong, it's that the behavior is ineffective and maladaptive for the circumstances that we're experiencing now as an adult. That's the first thing to just try and get our head around, because we don't want to start labeling the behavior as bad or wrong, because that induces shame in our system, which activates more fear, which ramps up the coping mechanism in the first place. So when we recognize that the behavior is ineffective and maladaptive, every single thing, and this is why I label this particular skill, we kind of touched on it a little bit in the last conversation that we did. Everything that we do in DBT, when it's integrated with schema therapy from the perspective that we work with it at the Liberation Place, is revolving around our ability to use the stop skill. So in dialectical behavior therapy, as we talked about before, a lot of the skills, not all of them, but a lot of the skills revolve around mnemonics, which is that each letter of the word is designed to activate something for us to remember to do. So stop skill falls into this category. Stop is S stands for stop, T stands for take a deep breath or take a step back, O stands for observe, and P stands for proceed with this new mindful perspective. Okay. A lot of people, when they start practicing this skill, are able to practice the S and the T quite effectively. Stop and take a step back. So I'm noticing that I'm getting emotionally distressed. So, there's an anger that's coming into my system. There's a fear that's coming into my system. There's a distraction that's coming into my system. And when I notice this, I activate the stop skill. So I'm going to stop and I'm going to take a deep breath, or I'm going to stop and I'm going to walk away. Right? It's quite common for people to be able to practice ST, right? So I'm going to stop and I'm going to take a step back. I'm going to walk off from this particular situation. I used to practice that effectively on a regular basis. The piece that's missing, and where we start to practice that thing that we call cognitive diffusion, is where the O and the P is. So when I'm observing what's happening in my system and when I'm observing what's happening externally, this is the opportunity for us to practice cognitive diffusion, to unblend from the part of our personality that's active in our system, so that we can start to do some work with that particular part by observing and describing non-judgmentally and effectively what it is that's happening inside of my system, so that I can proceed with this new mindful perspective and live the life I want to live. So the stop skill is the most important skill in dialectical behavior therapy, in my opinion. Yes, the mindfulness skills are really important for us to practice cognitive diffusion, learn how to recognize the distress, learn how to identify that we're going into that space of fight, flies, freeze, submit, or distract. And then the activation of the stop skill is where the work really begins. And the key to it is not just the S and the T. The key to it is the observe and describe non-judgmentally and effectively what's happening in my system. And that's all about the language that we use in our thoughts. Does that make sense?
It does. And I like that you said some people get the S and the T, and they may think that's an effective way. And if it is for them,
It
keep
can
doing
be.
it. It
Yeah, it
avoided
can be.
protector kicks in, I think, at that point. It's
Yeah,
like
yeah, exactly. Yeah.
I've experienced it myself, and I've seen it in others, and in certain situations it is.
Yeah.
But it's that inability when I feel I'm not able to stay. And it's like, what's going on? I'm so overwhelmed with my emotions right now that all I can think of doing is removing myself from these situations. That's
Exactly.
not effective for me to live my life like this. For
Yeah, if
me,
you're constantly running away from every situation when there's an emotional experience, it's effective in the short term, gets you away from that difficult situation that you're in. But in the bigger picture of living the life you want to live and being the person you want to be, especially if this is an area of life that's important for you to develop relationships and things like that, if every time there's a big emotional experience you run away, it's probably not effective for you to live the life you want to live and be the person you want to be, right?
it's totally correct. And one thing I want to say, because you brought it up in meetings past, which I'm just going to plug. If you like what we're talking about, Stephen runs groups. I highly recommend going to theliberationplace.com for more detail. But one of the things you brought up is that a lot are familiar with the fight, flight, freeze. Not too many, some know fawn. They'll say fawn, which is the
Yeah.
compromising, right? Submitting. But when we talk about distract,
Mm.
it's the one you've said before. Well, if you're not big enough, like when you're a child, you're
Yeah.
not big enough to run away. You need the protection of your family. You're not big enough to fight them.
Yeah.
So one of the biggest ones that children can resort to is distract.
Yeah.
And then we look at the population today, and there's some high diagnosis of ADHD.
That's huge right now. Yeah.
What are your thoughts? And please engage me if you will, on this being a developmental issue more than a biological one.
Yeah, I personally, and again, it's not. We're always trying to look at these things from a dialectical perspective, right? So, what I'm about to say does not apply to everybody. For some people, yes, there may be a biological factor to it that is causing this inability to focus. 100%, totally get it. However, I think a lot of the time when people are diagnosed with things like ADD and ADHD, personally, there's a lot of research that suggests that this is a fear response to the childhood environment that we grew up in. It's a learned behavior. So if I grow up in an environment where there is fear in the environment, and a lot of people think that when we talk about fear, we're describing things that are like, trauma induced, a lot of overwhelming emotional experiences, physical, sexual, emotional abuse, things like that. Not necessarily. What is frightening to, yes, that is, a part of it, definitely 100%. And if you experience those types of things, yeah, definitely that is a fear-inducing situation. But fear for a child at the same time can be things that are a lot more minor. A child processes what's happening in the environment a lot differently than an adult does. So, the massive increase in diagnosis of ADD and ADHD for me revolves around just society in general these days not being conducive for a child to feel safe in the environment, to get the support that it needs in a lot of households. And this is not something that is done deliberately by parents. I've got kids, both me and my wife work full time. We have to work full time in order to provide the kind of life that we want to provide for ourselves and for our children. And at the same time, dialectically speaking, that can create fear in the environment for a child if they're left on their own, if there's not the support that they need when they're emotionally experiencing something. And if a child in that environment learns that distraction is a really great way to get away from that anxiety that they're experiencing, then this becomes a learned behavior that will manifest as they get older every time there is an anxiety that comes into their system. A lot of people think that it's life that gives them anxiety, but it's not life that's giving you anxiety. It's your story about life that's creating the anxiety, and then that anxiety is activating a learned behavior to cope with it. In a lot of cases, I'm not saying that is the case for everybody, but for a lot of people, when you start talking about the diagnosis of ADD and the inability to focus, ADHD or ADD, and the inability to focus, when you really start digging at it, most of the time that lack of focus is because they're in a fear-based state.
Thank you for taking time to explain that. I love your explanation. And like you said, it's not black and white. And I also like that some people go to the extreme when they think of what trauma means. And while you were talking, I was thinking, I don't want to say that this is a definite, but I'm just going to put it as a hypothetical. You and your wife are having an argument in the kitchen. Your son hears it. He gets scared. Dad's mad right now.
100%.
He copes.
Yeah.
Maybe dad doesn't remember that happened and goes in and nurtures his son at that time.
Absolutely.
We're not perfect. We're not blaming the parents.
No.
Right?
No.
These are situations that happen. These are coping mechanisms that are gained. And through life, they can become maladaptive because they were effective at some point. But let's go back to the stop. We start with stop. I love that kind of enigma. We start with stop.
Everything starts with stop.
Everything starts with stop. I love it. Let's say we're in a point where we're not able to, I don't know, on our own, just stop ourselves. Yeah. I know there's a skill set, and I'd like you to elaborate on it, called TIP, that comes from DBT. And I know that this can somehow kind of just bring us back, if I'm not mistaken, like shock the system and help us stop. So can you please explain what TIP is?
Yeah, definitely. So everything starts with stop. As we said, it's the way we like to just kind of frame the stop skill. And it's important, as we were talking about before, to practice each letter, S-T-O-P, not just the S and the T, to develop our ability to observe and describe non-judgmentally and effectively what's happening in our system to create that cognitive diffusion so we can proceed from this new mindful perspective. But if you find yourself in that O phase, which is the opportunity to do the work, if you find yourself in that O phase and you just can't do it, you're nope, I need to escape, I need to run, I need to get out of here. Like there's something that's in your system that's not allowing you to focus, because that state of fight, flight, freeze, submit, or distract is so overwhelming. The skill that we want to try to step into and activate is the skill that's called TIP. So again, this is a mnemonic. A lot of people when they talk about DBT, it's a single P. For me, I do a double P in the tip skill. So TIPP. So temperature, intense exercise, progressive muscle relaxation, and paced breathing. If you combine the progressive muscle relaxation with the paced breathing, that is incredibly effective too. So let's just run through each one of those individually. When we're in a state of flight, start again. When we're in a state of fight, flight, freeze, submit, or distract, I'm just going to call it fight or flight from this point on. When we're in a state of fight or flight, our system is set up to just go into these automatic behaviors. We're outside of that window of tolerance. So what we want to try to do sometimes, if we just can't manage it, if we're like we're spiraling down a rabbit hole, we need to try to just settle things down in a very abrupt way. And we do this through the tip skill. This is designed to try to shut down the fight or flight response and bring us back into an area where we can maybe observe and describe what's happening. Okay. It's not intended to remove the emotional experience. It's so important to get that. Quite often people think, well, I practice the tip skill, but the emotion is still there. Yes, we're not trying to get rid of the emotion. We're trying to learn how to manage the emotion, right? We're trying to build our ability to handle that emotional experience so that we can do the work that's needed to be done. So tip tries to bring us back into that window of opportunity where we can observe and describe what's happening in our system. So temperature. I used to say, okay, I'll talk about this in a different way. Temperature is basically using our body temperature to try to bring us back into that space where we can observe and describe what's happening in our system. The most effective way that I have found to do this is through cold. So, splashing cold water on your face, put your face close to, not into an air conditioning vent or something like that. So the cold air is going on your face. Using a bucket of ice cubes and water, put your hands into it, put your feet into a bucket of ice cold water. Any kind of way that we can. I'm really hesitant to use a word. There's a word that's trying to come. There's a part of me that wants to use the word shock our system. I used to say shock our system, and somebody once took me literally when I was having that conversation and asked if they were supposed to shock themselves. That is not what I mean by that. I want to be really, really clear. But what we're trying to do with the cold is just to kind of give an abrupt change in temperature in our system so that it kind of deactivates that fight or flight response and brings us into the moment. So, I once was working with a guy in one-on-one, and we were talking about one of the things that we were working on was the area of life that was employment and career. And he was saying how every time he goes he was trying to find a new job, and every time he goes for a job interview, he flunks out because his anxiety goes through the roof. He gets really afraid when they ask him questions, and he doesn't know what to say. So we talked about temperature, and fortunately, this was in the days of COVID, so he was doing his job interviews on Zoom, much like we're talking right now. So we developed a plan where he had a bucket of ice cold water with ice cubes in it underneath the desk, and he had one shoe and sock off, so that when he was having this conversation, every time he got distracted, he would put his foot into the bowl of ice cube water, take a deep breath, and then see how he did. Right. And at the time when we were talking about this, he was like, this is not going to work. I said, just give it a shot. Right. Let's give it a try and see how it goes. 2 weeks later, when he met, he said, holy cow, I don't know how that worked, but it did. And I flew through the interview and I got the job. Because every time he was using that temperature, it shocked his system out of the fight or flight response and gave him the ability to process what the question was, to observe and describe what was happening externally and internally, and go through the work. So temperature is a really effective way for us to bring ourselves out of that space where we're really overwhelmed. Intense exercise is the I. If you are somebody who has the capability to do this, so first of all, please, this is a medical advisory before I start talking about this, because we have to be really clear on this sort of stuff. Please make sure that you are physically capable more than anything of doing this type of thing, because that is incredibly important. Speak to a doctor before you get involved in any kind of intense exercise program to make sure it's okay for you to do it. Intense exercise, if it's possible, if it's something that you're able to do, given the time and the space that you're in at the time of being activated, which it's not always going to be possible to do, is literally just putting yourself through a short burst of intense exercise to deactivate that sense of overwhelming emotion. So jumping jacks, burpees, running on the spot for 20 seconds, like something really intense and short term to shut down that particular response. Now, like I said, not always possible to do this. If I'm in the middle of a meeting and I'm in a state of fight or flight, and my system's getting overwhelmed, I can't just say 1 second, jump up and run on the spot as fast as I can for 20 seconds. Everybody's going to look
It'd be
at
funny if you did.
yeah, but people are going to look at me like, what the hell? So obviously this one is very much a case of, if it's possible for you to do so, absolutely go ahead and do it, right? If it's not, then we're going to look at other possibilities, which is where the P comes in, the two Ps. So progressive muscle relaxation and paired with paced breathing, or individually on their own. It's entirely up to you. So progressive muscle relaxation is a skill where basically you find an area of your body, like your hands, your shoulders, your feet, anything like that, where we're clenching those muscles and then completely relaxing them, clenching those muscles and then completely relaxing them. This has been shown through research that when you do this, if you pair it with paced breathing, so taking a deep breath in when you clench and slowly releasing that breath when you release the muscle, this has been shown to slow everything down in your system and bring you back from that particular state of fight or flight. So the tip skill is completely designed to bring you back from that overwhelming sense of emotion that is not allowing you to observe and describe non-judgmentally and effectively what's happening in your system. I'll give you a really good example of progressive muscle relaxation with paired breathing, which is, with paced breathing, which is used in the movies. You ever seen that classic Christmas movie, Die Hard?
Of course.
Yeah, when he's on the plane and the guy says to him, when you're really stressed out and you get home, find a rug, take off your shoes and socks and curl your toes up in that. It'll relax you right away.
Yeah.
That's progressive muscle relaxation.
Okay,
so it is incredibly effective if you can do it. One of the ones that I do on a regular basis if I'm feeling stressed out in a situation is I use my toes and my feet to curl them up in my socks, and I tense up the muscles and I just take some deep breaths and then I just relax them completely. Or I might tense up my thigh muscle. I'm doing it right now. You can't see that I'm doing it. And if I take a really deep breath at the same time when somebody's talking, it brings me back into a space where I can observe and describe non-judgmentally and effectively what's happening in my system. So if stop isn't working and we're really trapped, tip is the thing that we turn to bring us back into that phase where we can do that work.
You know what? Just for more clarification, I'm not going to harp on the fact that Die Hard is a Christmas movie, but for more clarification on the temperature control, I could say myself, I know a cold shower when I need to be shocked, sorry for lack of a better word, shocked back to a sense of baseline.
Yeah, we got to be really careful with that word.
I get you. People who take it literally rather than figuratively. But cold peas, you taught me that. Cold
peas on the back of your neck. Yeah, really great
works.
one. Yeah.
Can you, and I don't want to go too far into the sciences of this, but I think some may appreciate to understand, you've spoken behaviorally what's occurring, but neurologically, why is this happening? Like, what is the temperature doing? What's happening in my brain that's causing all this, Stephen?
Yeah, so I mean, obviously I'm not a brain specialist or anything like that. I'm a registered psychotherapist, but my training on it basically revolves around the autonomic nervous system, so the sympathetic and the parasympathetic system, not being able to work at the same time. So this is something where it is black and white, it's on or off. Best way to remember it, in my opinion, is hot versus cold. So the hot system is where the fight or flight system exists. The cold system is where our senses are activated and deactivated. So when the hot system is on, the cold system is off. When the cold system is on, the hot system is off. So when I'm in a state of fight or flight, what I want to try to do is activate the cold system so that this state of fight or flight shuts down. Now, just to be clear again, this doesn't remove the emotion. What it does is it just shuts down this overwhelming sense that we can't cope and we're going into these automatic behaviors. What it does is it gives us the opportunity to observe and describe what's happening in our system so that we can start to cognitively diffuse or unblend from that part and then activate some of the other skills. So The science behind it is that if you activate your senses in a way that is abrupt, so it happens quickly, it shuts down that hot system and gives you the ability to then, and the opportunity to then do the work, the cognitive work, the emotional work, the processing what's going on that we do with the other skills, because sometimes we're just not capable of doing it because we're overwhelmed. So there is a lot of research that shows that if you activate your senses in this way, it shuts down that fight or flight response and gives you the opportunity to do the work.
And the thing I find, I say this to people who bring up words like dopamine or serotonin. I say I understand what they're pleasurable chemicals of the brain, but I'm not a neurologist, and all I can tell you is my experience of
Yeah,
I feel
exactly.
good or I feel bad. I
Yeah.
can't be like, I feel some oxytocin actually entering my system right now. I'm
I love
not
you.
that much, right? I love you. But okay. And the other thing I want to just kind of bridge on to is that you are a person that's doing something unique, and that you're combining different modalities of psychotherapy by creating this DBT schema amalgam, and the language kind of gets mixed up. So we have the term mode management, and then we
Yeah.
have the term distress tolerance.
Yeah.
They both mean the same thing. Am I right to say that?
When you combine the two, what we're trying to do in the distress tolerance skills give us the opportunity to manage the modes of behavior that come into behavioral responses. Okay, so it's not that they're the same thing, it's that we use one to accomplish the other. So we use the skills of distress tolerance to practice mode management, right? Because mode management is basically, I want to learn how to, before I can start to remove the rigidity that is attached to particular schema that get activated in my system, which is ultimately what we're trying to do. And we'll get into that when we start, excuse me, when we start talking about emotion regulation in the next conversation. Before I can start to remove that rigidity, I need to be able to manage the parts of my personality that are reacting to the distress that's in my system. And that's called mode management. So we use the skills of distress tolerance to practice mode management. So mode management is all about, it's pretty self-explanatory. It's managing the modes of behavior that get activated in our system, so that the behavioral responses are not creating the chaos, the turmoil, the problematic outcomes that they were creating before. So if there's a part of my personality that is responding in a very rigid way to a particular situation, the skills of distress tolerance help me to manage that mode of behavior, so it's not creating the problems that it was before. So mode management is all about creating new habitual responses to these emotional experiences, and we basically do that through the use of primarily through the use of a skill in dialectical behavior therapy, distress tolerance, that is called accepts. So this is a really big skill that we want to get to grips with. There's as with all of the distress tolerance skills, just to give the rest of the YouTube channel and the website a bit of a plug, there is a video on each of these skills on the YouTube channel and on the website. So accepts, again, it falls into a mnemonic. So this one's a bit quite long, so I'm just going to quickly go through them, and then we'll touch on basically what the intention of the skill is. We're not going to get into individually how you do each particular aspect, otherwise we'd be here for hours. But so we'll just quickly touch on what accept stands for. Okay, so accepts is ACCEPTS. Okay, so the A stands for activities. What are the activities that I can draw upon that are going to help me to distract myself in a healthy way from the emotional experience that I'm having? And we want to, with this particular skill, one of the most important things is to write these things down. I know I'm kind of saying that very because it is so important to understand the aspect of writing it down and having this list in an area where we go, or something to remind us to go to this particular list when we start to get emotionally activated, so that we can develop these new habits. Because when we go into a state of fight or flight, the mode of behavior that kicks in for us is an automatic habitual response. So we need to create new automatic habitual responses to manage the modes of behavior. So each part of our personality is not a bad part. It just never learned how to use its behavior in an effective and adaptive way. So how do we distract from the situation effectively and adaptively? is through the use of the accept skill. So what are the activities that I can distract myself from the situation in a healthy way? Okay. C, so there's two C's, no particular order. First one is comparison. Now, so for some people, it can be effective to compare ourselves to other people's situations. A lot of people, it's not effective though. So, if it's effective for you to say, I could be worse, I could be in this situation, then, go ahead and use that comparison. For me, the comparison aspect of the accept skill, though, is comparing myself to where I was previously so that I can notice the progress that I'm making. So yes, I want to start doing comparisons to, how I used to deal with things. So in the early part of my own recovery journey, a lot of time was spent noticing that I'd done another 24 hours of sobriety, right? So I'm going to compare. I didn't drink today. I didn't use the substances that I used today. So that's, compared to where I was a week ago, 2 weeks ago, that's amazing progress. Today there was a situation where my kids said something and I responded in a very calm and educational way that helped them to see things from a different perspective. That's way better than the way I would have responded in the past, where I would have just got angry and started yelling at them and it would have escalated into a space of chaos. So the C for comparison, yes, it can be to compare to others, but that's a dangerous place to go, especially when we're looking on social media all the time, comparing ourselves to this fake life that people put out there on social media. So I prefer to look at the comparison aspect of things from the space of look at the progress that I'm making. The second C is all about contribution. So if we're feeling like really stressed out and down about ourselves, if we're not able to, to feel good about the things that we're doing, it can be incredibly effective to contribute to our society in a way that helps us to lift our particular mood. It helps us to distract and avoid away from what's happening underneath the surface and give us a better feeling about who we are. Now, again, we want to be careful of this if we have a tendency of falling into a schema of self-sacrifice and things like that. So, that awareness is really important. But the contribution doesn't have to be this massive contribution that we put out to society where we're volunteering at the local food bank or we're giving back in this massive effective way that everybody sees. That might be an attention seeking piece that we're falling into. So contribution can be the way that I like to practice contribution is by saying thank you to people when they do something. I'm contributing to the people around me, holding a door open for somebody without the expectation that they're going to say thank you, complimenting my partner on the way that she looks and something that she's wearing or something that she's done, acknowledging something that she's done well without the expectation that I'm going to get it back. Just, giving my kids encouragement, telling my kids that I'm proud of them, speaking to my friends and letting them know that I appreciate the relationship, doing something nice for a neighbor. Maybe I have a shared driveway, and when the snow's coming down, sometimes I'll just shovel both driveways without the expectation that they're going to do it back for me. I'm just going to do it because I'm contributing and it makes me feel good. I did something nice for somebody today. Okay, so the contribution piece can help to lift our mood. Then we go into the E, which is the emotion. Now, a lot of people don't realize that, yes, we can't control really what's happening in our system, the activation of what's happening in our system, because we're human beings, we have emotional reactions. But once those emotions are reacted in our system, we do have the ability to control what direction they go by what we put into our system through our eyes and our ears. So if I am feeling really down and I'm in a low mood, I can change that emotional experience by what I listen to and what I watch. If I'm feeling really anxious, really afraid, and my system is spiraling into this place of, fight or flight because I'm getting really anxious about what's happening, I have the ability to bring that down by what I listen to and what I watch. So building a list of the different podcasts, music, TV shows, videos, anything that you can watch and listen to that helps to change your emotional experience, and then having this list on hand so that when you notice that your mood is shifting, you notice that you've been trapped in a particular mindset for a bit, let's go to that list of emotion and see how I can shift these emotional experiences by what I watch and what I listen to. Okay, the P stands for push away. This is basically just an acceptance of the fact that it is okay to avoid things if it's really overwhelming for you. Right? If it's effective in the short term, For you to just avoid something, then, you know, because it helps you in the long term to live the life you want to live and be the person that you want to be, that is totally fine. There is nothing wrong with an avoid and protector if it's effective for you to live the life you want to live and be the person that you want to be. Great example. In the early part of my recovery, if I got invited to a space where there were people that were using alcohol and substances that I didn't feel comfortable being in, and my avoidant protector said to me, hell no, we're not going there, incredibly effective in the short term and incredibly effective in the bigger picture of living the life I want to live and being the person that I want to be. There is nothing wrong with pushing the emotion away from time to time to avoid the particular situation that we're in. So build a list of the things that you can do to just push the emotion away. Okay. T is thoughts. We don't realize that I didn't realize that when I get trapped in a thought rumination process, like that hamster on the wheel that is constantly thinking the same thought process over and over again, you know, when when I've done something that has activated my internal critic, and that internal critic is trapped in a thought process of I'm a loser, I'm stupid, I'm an idiot, and it's just this hamster on a wheel that's repeating that. You're a loser, you're an idiot, you're stupid, you're a loser, you're an idiot, you're stupid. Or if you get stuck in some kind of thought rumination about a particular situation that's coming up, we have the ability to shift ourselves out of that thought rumination, that like obsessive thought process that's going on in our mind, by focusing our mind onto something else that distracts us away from that particular thought process. One of the best ways that I know of doing this is to focus your mind on saying the alphabet backwards. Or there's a really great skill in DBT that is intended to show how people cannot multitask. That's a different conversation, but I don't want to get into right now because that would take us off in a different direction. But how people cannot multitask, which is by saying the alphabet followed by the number one, the letters 1 to 26. So A1, B2, C3, D4, and trying to do that as fast as you can. Just focus your mind on doing that. Most people, when they get to like, you know, G or something like that, start to really have to slow things down, and it stops that thought rumination. So using the skill of accept gives us the ability to be able to stop that thought rumination. Make a list of the skills that you can use that stops the thought rumination. Then the final one is S, which stands for sensations. Most of the behavioral responses that we have, particularly when we're talking about addictive, obsessive, compulsive coping mechanisms, things like substance use and process addictions, those types of things, those behavioral responses, first of all, they're the solution to the problem and not the problem itself. And they are also an attempt to self-soothe the part of our personality that's in emotional distress. So there's nothing wrong with self-soothing. You know, we have a detached self-soother in our personality for a reason. Everybody has a detached self-soother in their personality. We just have to teach that detached self-soother how to do things in a healthy way. So make a list of the way that you use your senses to soothe your system. What are the smells, the aromas that you can activate that help you to calm your system when it's anxious? What are the sounds that you can listen to that help to relax you when you're feeling overstimulated? Right. So use your sense. What are the touches that you can use? I walked around with a thing called a feeling stone for the early part of my own recovery journey, because somebody told me that when you have this feeling stone in your hand and you focus your attention on the roughness of the stone as you're rubbing it through your fingers, it helps to relax your system. It was incredibly effective for self-soothing for me, so much so that I had to keep updating that stone because every now and again it was so smooth, there was no texture left on it because of the way I kept rubbing it. So it's really important to build that list of ways that we practice self-soothing through our senses. So the accept skill is all about building new habitual responses. And then the key to it is through our routine and structure, implementing these skills by practicing them every day. If there are specific times in the day where I feel overwhelmed, implement a practice of accepts. If there are specific times in the day where I know I fall into unhealthy or maladaptive and ineffective behavior responses, you know, as soon as I walk through the door, I sit down and start playing video games and I don't stop until 1 o'clock in the morning. You know, as soon as I walk through the door, go to that list of accepts, pick something from that list and start practicing it. What you're doing by doing this is creating new habits of effective and adaptive coping mechanisms for emotional responses. That's a lot of information. So, if we want to look more at the accept skill, take a look at the video on the YouTube channel and the website, because it elaborates a lot more, and there's a worksheet that goes with it.
Worksheets are great too, because it helps put myself into the exercise. When you're talking about the emotional part, there's a part of me that gets confused at times, because I know this isn't black and white work, but when I'm sad, am I supposed to throw on my Lionel Richie and feed the sadness, or am I supposed to cheer myself up?
Yeah.
And so this is somewhat black and white to you, Stephen, that
Well, it's not really black and white. It's what's effective for you.
is it effective for me to be sad right now, or is it
Yeah.
effective?
Is it
Well,
is it effective for you to sit in that sadness and process it by listening to that music? Does that help you to live the life you want to live and be the person that you want to be? If it does, sit with it, sit with the sadness. But if it's not, because you've got to go to work and you've got to earn money to pay your bills and stuff like that, and staying sat with the part of you that's sad is going to keep you trapped at home in an avoidant protector mode, then that's not effective. Sometimes it is effective to stay in the emotion if that's the objective of the situation that you're in, and sometimes it's not. So it's not black and white. It's whether it's effective or ineffective for you to live the life you want to live and be the person that you want to be.
I do. And I think that this is where the tools, when used together, are most effective for this whole program, because and we're not going to go into this one right now, but the Raven is what jumps out to me at that moment, is how I would still be able to appreciate that part of my personality and maybe revisit it when we're done the day's work. But for now, we need to be effective, and it's not suck it up, buttercup,
No,
right? It's not
no.
exactly, you know what I mean, though? Like that, this is where the being able to deal with that part of my emotion and say, you know what, hey, bud, we're going to revisit this. I love you. But for now, let's do this, and we'll
Yeah.
come back. We'll revisit this later, which
Yeah.
kind of brings me to another mnemonic, which, just to be clear once again to people who are confused on the difference of acronyms and mnemonics, because DBT uses a lot of them, is these mnemonics give us actual action points. It's not
Yes.
just breaking down the word, it's
Yeah.
telling us what to do with it. And the next one I wanted to bring up is the improve skill.
Yeah.
Would you first, like you did with accept, when would I want to use the improve skill, and what does it mean? I guess, what does it mean, and when would I want to use it?
Yeah. So the improved skill is basically designed. So the thing about dialectical behavior therapy skills training is that it is an educational process, and in any educational process, they use. So if there's educators out there that are watching this, I am not a trained educator. I just know this term. I mean, I am a trained educator when it comes to this dialectical skills training. But I'm not a trained educator in the bigger picture. I never went to school for education or anything like that. But I was introduced through DBT to the term scaffolding. So in education, scaffolding basically means that we start with this, and then as we progress through the program, we build on it, right? So scaffolding is something that's really apt when we start talking about the improved skill. So the improved skill is how we start to build on our mindfulness practice in order to really learn and start to develop our ability to sit with the distress that's coming into our system. This is where the work of mindful awareness starts to scaffold from the original skills of observe, describe, and participate. So the improved skill is where we want to start to build the habit of being able to sit with the emotional experience that we're having. Okay, does that make sense first of all?
So far, yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So the mnemonic for improve is first of all imagery. So imagery work is basically how we start to imagine different situations as they played out in our day-to-day experiences, so that we can start to recognize the emotional experience that we had, so that we can maybe imagine things playing out differently, so that we can see what we might have done. And we start to use imagery work because as we go into the emotion regulation stuff, and we're going to scaffold on the improved skill. So we've got the mindfulness skills, we've got the improved skill, and as we go into the emotion regulation, we're really going to build on that to start to remove the rigidity. So the imagination aspect of this work is really important. So just taking the time in your day to sit down and imagine yourself in the situation that you were in today that was challenging. So when we start doing mode journaling and things like that, the improved skill starts to become really important with the imagination piece. So putting yourself back in that situation, what were you thinking, what were you feeling, what was going on for you, and just practicing the ability to sit for a period of time in that emotional experience. Okay. The M stands for meaning. We are, as human beings, we are meaning-making machines. This is what we do. We attach meaning to absolutely everything. And from a schema therapy perspective, this is what schemas are. It's basically the meaning that we attach to every single thing that we do when it comes to living the life we want to live or not living the life we want to live. And there are maladaptive and ineffective schemas, and there are adaptive and effective schemas. Every maladaptive and ineffective schema has an adaptive and effective counterpart to it. And we're trying to find the balance between the two. So how do we do that? Let's sit with the meaning that we're attaching to situations and see if we can figure out what that meaning was. What is the rigid perspective that we're attaching to these situations? Spend some time just sitting with that. If you're finding that you don't have any meaning, you're really struggling to find meaning in what you're doing, let's look at your values and beliefs. Let's visit the values and beliefs exercise in the areas of life that are important to you and start to live according to those values and beliefs. Build that routine and structure. Look at the lifestyle balance pie so that you are living your life in areas that has meaning for you, because that will give your life meaning. So the M stands for meaning. The P stands for prayer. Now, for some people who have a religious persuasion, a particular religious practice that they are attached to, prayer can be an incredibly effective skill to use. So the P in the improved skill is primarily revolving around the practice of prayer on a daily basis, if that helps you. If you are not somebody that follows a religious practice, that is totally okay. This is where we want to start practicing meditation. So how do I practice meditation? How do I practice prayer? And how do I build that into my daily routines? Let's practice this. Let's put this into our routine and structure. Let's build the habit of checking in with my system to see exactly what it is that I'm feeling, what it is that I'm thinking. Practice the mode journaling. So the P stands for prayer. So the R stands for relaxation. Okay, so it's really important to start to, when we look at the skills of accept and we start to integrate them with the skills of improve and building these things into our daily routines and creating the habit, how do you relax? What does self-care look like for you? A lot of people think that self-care is all about, especially when we're looking in recovery circles, a lot of people think that self-care is I'm going to go to a meeting, I'm going to have a conversation about recovery. If all you do is focus on recovery, 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 then sooner or later you're going to burn out on recovery. You're going to go, I've had enough of them. I swore then. I've had enough of this. I'm going to, I'm going to go back to the old ways of dealing with things. So it is incredibly important to start to build a list of the ways that we relax. How do you practice self-care? How do you switch off? How do you disconnect from the stresses of day-to-day life? Not to try to remove the stresses of day-to-day life, because that's just impossible. Life has stresses in it. But how do we learn how to relax? Okay. The O stands for one thing, one moment. So how am I practicing one mindfulness? We talked about that in the mindfulness conversation. How am I building that into my routine and structure? What do my one mindful activities look like every single day? How do I build this into my daily routines? What one mindful activities am I doing in those situations where I don't need to think about what I'm doing? The V stands for vacation. Now, it would be absolutely fantastic if we could all take a vacation every time we get stressed out physically. Unfortunately, that is not possible. Sometimes it's not possible to take a vacation at all for some people, financially or whatever it is. There's two ways of looking at this. One, we can turn anything into a vacation if we detach from what's happening over here. Right. So if we get into the moment on a weekend when we've got a day off and we're spending time with family, that can be a vacation from the situation that we're experiencing. Yes, if you are able to physically take a vacation, get away for a weekend, yeah, go for it. So the vacation aspect can be a physical thing, but it can also be a mindfulness activity. How can I take a break from the stresses in my thoughts, in my feelings? For me, one of the most beautiful places I've ever been to in the world is an island called Bermuda. So when I want to take a vacation in my mind, I've got images that I picture myself on the beach in Bermuda, with the ocean as clear as it is, the sand that's got this like pink texture to it, and the heat on my face, and I just imagine myself in that situation, taking a vacation from my stresses, taking some big deep breaths, and just going on a vacation in my mind. So we can do it physically, but we can also do it mentally through imagination. Okay. And then the E stands for encouragement. So a lot of people see encouragement as what's known as positive affirmations. Yeah, sometimes that can be incredibly effective. So what we're trying to remember is, and again, this is going to be built upon when we get into the emotion regulation aspect of things, when we start talking about a skill that's called paying attention to positive events. The encouragement piece is all about recognizing the things that we've done well. So, what did I do well today? What was I challenged by, and how did I do it differently than I would have in the past? So, build this into your daily routine of acknowledging the things that you've done well. So, accepts and improve are both about creating new habits that we build upon when we go into the emotion regulation aspect of things, that help us to distract and avoid in a healthy way, sit with the emotional experiences that are overwhelming our system, and change the perception that we have about the rigidity we have in perception about those particular situations. Does that make sense?
It does. And like just to be clear on it too, if I take the process of maladaptive behavior existing in that I'm still using substance, I'm managing it in that I'm now getting activated. I'm no longer using the substance, but there's still a part of me that wants to use the substance.
Yeah,
So we're going to move on to that part in our next episode. But for now, we're focusing more on the mode management, which is stopping the behavior from occurring, not the emotional response that's activating the behavior.
exactly.
Okay. So what are the, I guess, because I have a note here that I wanted to talk about radical acceptance
Yeah.
specifically in this process. And I think of tolerance of a situation. Like, can you tell me like what is the process of, am I radically accepting the situation or my emotional experience with it when I'm doing this?
Yeah. So sometimes, no matter what we're doing, all the practice that we're putting in place, sometimes the situation that we're facing it's just not changeable, right? So in DBT, there's a basic concept that we look at that any situation that plays out in our life circumstances, we basically have two choices. We can change or we can accept. Right? We can change the way that we react to it. We can change the things that we do. We can change the perception that we have. There are things that we can change, or we just accept things the way that they are and go on with our life. Now, there are two ways that we accept things, okay? In DBT, distress tolerance, the acceptance that we're practicing is radical acceptance. So this is a term that gets thrown around a lot in a lot of like DBT circles or recovery circles. You'll hear people say, well, I just have to radically accept it. I think this term gets confused a little bit because radical acceptance is a short-term distress tolerance skill. It's not a long-term concept. It is designed to get me through the moment and remove the tendency that I have to fall into a story about the situation. So with radical acceptance, what I'm trying to accept is the facts and only the facts. What are the facts of this situation that I cannot change? Not what my story is about that situation, because my story will take me down the road of internal critics and different schema that have been activated. It's radical acceptance is all about in this moment, what are the facts of the situation that I cannot change? So sometimes, all the habitual responses that I've got that I'm changing through using accepts and improves. I'm practicing the stop skill. I'm using tip to bring me into a space where I can activate some of these activities and imagery work and all the things that I'm trying to do. Doesn't change the fact that the situation is the way that the situation is in the moment. And in order to get through this without activating a maladaptive and ineffective coping mechanism, I need to practice radical acceptance of the facts. So, for example, I get an email on Friday at 4:30 when I'm working for an organization, and I get an email at 4:30 on a Friday afternoon from my boss saying, I need to see you in my office at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. Okay. First thing that's going to do to me is it's going to activate a schema of defectiveness. It's going to activate a schema of vulnerability. Something bad is going to happen. It's going to activate all these stories in my mind that is going to completely derail my weekend. Because now for the entire weekend, I'm going to be sitting around going, oh my God, I'm going to get fired. Something bad is going to happen. What did I do? I'm going to be running over all the situations that I've gone through in the last 2, 3 weeks, trying to see if, there's something that I did that I need to be prepared for. When in actuality, the facts of the situation are my boss wants to see me in his office at 9 a.m. on Monday morning. So sometimes, in order to be the person that I want to be and live the life I want to live effectively and adaptively, to be with my family on the weekend and spend some time with them where I'm not wrapped up in anger and resentment and fear and guilt and shame and all these things that's impacting my weekend, I need to radically accept the fact that my boss has asked to see me at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, and I don't know what the story is. The only thing I know is that my boss has asked me to see him in my office at 9 a.m. on Monday morning, and I need to radically accept that. The thing about radical acceptance is that it is a moment by moment thing. Just because I say I'm radically accepting it doesn't mean in 5 minutes' time I'm not going to go back into my story. So radical acceptance is sometimes something that I have to keep practicing over and over and over again. I have to keep saying, I'm just radically accept. I don't know why my boss wants to see me on Monday morning. I need to be in the moment. All I know is that he wants to see me on Monday morning. I need to radically accept that. Right. So it's just about the facts. It's not about the story. When we get into the story, that's all emotion regulation aspect of things. So radical acceptance is a moment by moment skill where we're trying to accept the fact of the situation in order to get through a period of time where we can start to assess what's actually happening. Does that make sense?
It does. And I want to share my own personal story because I think it'll be useful for the listeners that
Sure.
are hearing this. You and I had a discussion recently where I described to you that I was feeling emotionally upset about something and I knew that I could resolve it. And you asked me, well, what's wrong with just sitting with it? Like, what's wrong with sitting with the discomfort? And in the example you're giving right now, I was in a very similar situation where on a Thursday, I had called in sick to work. And my boss wrote me a text message back that said, be in the office tomorrow at 9. Make sure you got your computer and your phone. So I called him right away. What the hell is that? What do you? And he's like, what do you mean? What the hell is that? What? I thought you were sick. And I'm like, I am sick, but I'm well enough to call you. What kind of message are you sending me? He's like, what do you mean? Well, bring in my computer and my phone. What are you firing me? And he goes, no, we got a systems update and you got a new phone here waiting for you. And I'm like, oh, okay. But here's my thing, Stephen, is that I could have not called him. I could have sat there with myself and radically accepted the circumstance and then dealt with my own journey of all of those ruminations that are coming with it, all the guilt for that's unfounded because obviously there was no actuality in any of it. If anything, it threw him off that I was being defensive. And
Yeah.
it just showed all the stories that were in my head. And rather than being able to venture and journey with myself, I had to fix it. And
Yeah.
that to me is interesting because it
I,
is. Go ahead, Stephen. What are you
I
going
was
to
just
say?
gonna say, and in this the example that you're giving there, you kind of got lucky because your boss was you were able to contact your boss and you were able to communicate in a way that didn't really screw things up. There's been times in the past where I've been in a similar situation that you're talking about, and my reaction where I've called up has created an even bigger situation than was originally there. You know what I
Oh, because
mean?
you
So
come aggressively.
yeah, because you come across as aggressive. There's a communication style that's not effective for what it is that you're trying to achieve. So sometimes it's more effective to just radically accept the situation until the situation expands and you got more information so that you can do the work that you need to do around either distress tolerance or emotion regulation. So radical acceptance is all about a short-term solution to a problem that is impacting you emotionally until you can get to a space where you can evaluate things better.
Yeah, that makes complete sense to me. Okay, so just to wrap things up a little, let's where would we say in the steps? We say that we're in module 3, but where would you say a person would want to start practicing distress tolerance? And I know this isn't black and white, so let me try and ask this as best I can. But when would they begin practicing distress tolerance? How long would they be doing it for before they can start moving into emotional regulation, which is what we're going to discuss in the next conversation?
Yeah, so I mean a very, very common question that gets asked, like, how long do I have to do this? And I'm going to just kind of give the response that my old man, my dad, used to say to me when I was a kid, and I, wanted to know how long I was going to have to do something for. My dad used to look at me and say, well, how long's a piece of string? Because the answer to that question is as long as it needs to be. So that's the answer to the question, how long does it take? How long do I have to be in the distress tolerance skills? I've been in my own personal recovery journey this time around for, 14 years or so now. And I still practice the distress tolerance skills on a daily basis. I still use the skills of accept and improve because they are just a part of my lifestyle now, to practice self-care, to distract and avoid from emotional stresses, to live the life I want to live and be the person that I want to be. So, as I say with everybody when we start talking about dialectical behavior therapy is not, in my opinion, it's not just a book you read and put back on the shelf. It's not just something that you learn and go, okay, I did DBT. Dialectical behavior therapy is a lifestyle. And the more that we practice the skills and build them into our daily routines and just the way that we live our lives, the more effective they are. So using the skills of distress tolerance is something that for me, it's a lifestyle choice. So I constantly practice accept, I constantly practice improve. I use the stop skill on a daily basis, multiple times in a day. Tip is something that I used to use a lot more than I do now, but every now and again I will still use it because I've expanded my window of tolerance by mindfulness and living the life I want to live and all that sort of stuff. So rarely do I need to use the tip skill now. But in the beginning, the tip skill was something that I used on a regular basis. When you start using the distress tolerance skills, as soon as you can. First of all, it's important to build that mindfulness practice. I always recommend, that's a black and white statement, but this is a black and white situation. I always recommend to everybody that I work with, everybody that I speak to, that you start to use the stop skill as fast as you possibly can. Right, learning how to take the mindfulness aspect of observe and describe non-judgmentally and effectively and build that into the stop skill. So stop, take a deep breath, observe and describe non-judgmentally and effectively so that I can proceed with my day. As soon as you can, start practicing that, because if you come out of a DBT skills training program and you've implemented the skills of mindfulness and the stop skill effectively, your life will automatically improve, in my opinion, because you're not going to be reacting to things. You're going to have built your self-awareness. You're going to have created a new perception on the way that life is for you. So, as soon as you can, start implementing them and then practice them, practice them, practice them. And when you think you've practiced them enough, practice them some more.
I love it, Stephen. And I just want to end with I think that the fun part about it is that we're never going to achieve perfection. It's the when I get activated now, not in the moment of, but in hindsight, it's like a place I can play.
Yeah.
It's wow, something happened there. Let's explore myself a
Yeah.
little
Absolutely.
rather than self-deprecation,
Yeah.
right?
Totally get it.
It's so anyway, so okay. I hope you guys are enjoying these talks. I'm really loving having them. But I think that's it for now, Stephen.